Like, do you want a thumbs up for me or something? Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to the Draft Environmental Assessment public meeting with respect to the deactivated SM-1A nuclear power plant located at Fort Greely, Alaska. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, USACE is proposing to decommission and dismantle the deactivated SM-1 reactor located at Fort Greely. This public meeting is being held during the 30-day Draft Environmental Assessment public review period to provide opportunities for the public to learn about and comment on the proposed action in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act. Substantive public and agency comments received during the NEPA process will be addressed as part of the final EA as appropriate. So I'm your speaker for this evening. I'm Brenda Barber. I'm a program manager with the Baltimore District Corps of Engineers. And we have a joint team between the Baltimore District and the Alaska District who is here supporting us as well this evening. I'd also like to recognize Special Assistant Emily Peterson-Wood from Congressman Young's office. And then attending virtually is staff from Senator Mikulski and Senator Sullivan's office. So today's key topics include a brief history of the SM-1A. We'll review and discuss the National Environmental Policy Act, commonly referred to as NEPA. We'll talk about the proposed action to include purpose, need, alternatives, and resources analyzed. We'll review the findings of the Draft Environmental Assessment. We'll discuss the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106. And then finally, we'll discuss public involvement as part of this process. Throughout tonight's meeting, you may ask questions throughout the meeting. If you are attending virtually, you'll have to enter your comment in the chat function, and then we will read it aloud to the group and answer your question in that format. Additionally, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of each topic. So our first topic is the brief history of the SM-1A. So as I indicated, the SM-1A is located on Fort Greely. We're just going to give you some situational awareness with respect to where Fort Greely is located. So it's located approximately 5 miles outside of Delta Junction, approximately 100 miles outside of Fairbanks, and 263 miles to Valdez, 328 miles to Anchorage, and approximately 386 miles to the Port of Whittier. This next photo illustrates to you a map of the Fort Greely installation. So you can see the SM-1A reactor site is primarily in the middle of the installation. You can see Allen Army Airfield Base, and then you can see the 49th Missile Defense Battalion at the site. So we want to discuss some of the affected areas of the SM-1A. So the photo to your right, I'm assuming, yeah, is the picture of the SM-1, which is formerly located in Building 606 in the north end of the facility. So that is the area where we will focus our efforts. In addition to that, operations associated with the reactor are also operated in Building 607, which we refer to as Building J5. The south end of the plant is the central heating and power plant for the installation. And so that will remain fully functional throughout the process. In addition to the reactor facilities in the north end of the plant, there were 3 wells associated with the operation of the facility. So wells 11, 12, and 13, as you can see depicted in the photo here, will also be abandoned in place, and all the surface structures associated with those wells will be removed as part of our decommissioning effort. So a little bit of operational history with respect to the SM-1A. It was built on Fort Greely between 1958 and 1962. The Army Corps of Engineers actually contracted for the construction and design and construction of the facility. It was designed, constructed, and operated as part of the Army Nuclear Power Plant Program, which was a joint effort within the Department of Defense for the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. It was a single-loop, 20.2 megawatt pressurized water reactor. It used highly enriched uranium dioxide fuel to generate the electrical power for the installation, as well as to provide steam for the installation. And so the facility was operational from 1962 until 1972. During that time frame, we only had to change the core 4 times as opposed to delivering fuel on a daily basis in a conventional power plant. This facility was used as an in-service test facility to understand and research how the equipment would function in an Arctic environment. So after the facility was no longer needed, the SM-1A underwent an initial deactivation, and portions of the site were encased in a concrete and grout slurry mix. So the decommissioning process began upon the reactor's final shutdown in March of 1972. This initial deactivation consisted of placing the facility in safe storage, which we refer to as safe store. This allows the remaining radioactivity at the site to be maintained and monitored while the radioactivity decays. The site is subject to regular inspection and monitoring in accordance with Army Regulation 50-7 and our Army-issued reactor possession permit. So as I indicated previously, the south end of the facility is the central heating and power plant for the installation. It is owned and operated by Doyen Utilities, and so we are cooperating and working with them as part of this effort in addition to the installation staff and our stakeholders. So just want to briefly walk you through the timeline. As I indicated, construction of the SM-1A began in 1958. It was operational from 62 to 72. Initial decommissioning and encasement took place in 74 and 73, and the site has been ongoing monitoring while in safe store since that period of time. From 1997 to 1999, Fort Greely was placed on the BRAC list, and so the Army moved in and we removed the original discharge line associated with the SM-1A. So that was removed and completed under a record of decision, so we don't plan to do any additional work along that discharge line. In 2008, USACE began our efforts at the site and completed a historical site assessment. And in 2014, our team moved back up to the facility to do a characterization survey report, which included collecting a wide variety of data on the radiological contamination remaining at the site. In 2018, our team awarded a decommissioning planning contract, which is currently underway. And this year, we hope to finish the environmental assessment, and by fiscal year 2022, we will be awarding the overall decommissioning contract for the work at the site. We anticipate that project will take approximately 6 years to be completed, and we're targeting 2028 as our completion timeline. So that's the end of topic number 1. Are there any questions? No questions. Okay. So we are going to move into topic number 2, which is a brief discussion on the National Environmental Policy Act. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 establishes a national policy for the environment. NEPA requires all federal agencies to analyze the environmental and socioeconomic impacts of their proposed action. NEPA also requires opportunities for public involvement to learn about and comment on proposed actions. As part of the NEPA process, USACE is preparing an environmental assessment to analyze the potential impacts from the proposed decommissioning, the proposed action. The EA is a concise public document that provides sufficient evidence and analysis for determining whether to prepare an environmental impact statement. The EA includes a discussion of the following: the purpose and need for the proposal, alternatives to the proposal, the environmental and socioeconomic impacts of the proposed action and alternatives, and a listing of agencies and persons consulted throughout the process. As part of the EA, we looked at several regulatory requirements. This list is not all-inclusive, but some of the key items are the Clean Water Act, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, Section 438 of the Energy Independence and Security Act, the Clean Air Act, a Migratory Bird Treaty Act, National Historic Preservation Act, and several other requirements from a regulatory perspective. So again, just want to quickly walk you through some key timeline milestones. As I indicated, after the site was shut down in 1973, the site was placed into safe store and has been actively monitored by the Corps of Engineers under our possession permits for the site. In the early 2000s, we completed our all hazards assessment. In 2008, the historical site assessment. From 2010 to 2012, we completed our characterization surveys at the site. In 2014, and again in 2019 and 2020, we did additional characterization work at the site as part of our decommissioning planning effort. And as I indicated, in calendar year 2021, we plan to finalize our EA, issue a finding of no significant impact. Both of those are anticipated in the June timeframe. We will present our documentation to the Army Reactor Office and apply for our decommissioning permit. And then in 2022, we plan to award the decommissioning contract with an anticipated completion date of 2028. So that's the end of topic number 2. Does anyone have any questions? Nothing. Okay. So we'll move to topic number 3. We'll start discussing the proposed action for the site. The proposed action is USACE proposes to complete the decommissioning and dismantlement of the SM-1A in accordance with the decommissioning permit approved and issued by the Army Reactor Office. We plan to terminate the Army-issued SM-1A decommissioning permit at the end of the project, which will allow us to release the SM-1A site for unrestricted use in accordance with U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulations adopted by the Army. And again, just reiterating the overall timeline, approximately 6 years to complete the project. I want to walk you through the proposed action and discuss the purpose of the proposed action. The proposed action is to safely remove, transport, the purpose of the proposed action is to safely remove, transport, and dispose of all materials and equipment, structures, and residual contamination associated with the SM-1A. Release the SM-1A site for unrestricted use in accordance with the radiological dose criteria established by the NRC and adopted by the Army, and to terminate the Army-issued SM-1A decommissioning permit. So the need for the proposed action, we need to complete the decommissioning of the SM-1A within 60 years, which is 2032, of the initial deactivation of the site. This is to allow us to comply with the NRC regulations and Army Regulation 50-7. The intent is the SM-1A has been maintained in safe store condition and subject to regular inspection and monitoring since 1972. In its current condition, the SM-1A does not support the Army's mission on Fort Greely, not now or in the future. And the proposed action would enable USACE to meet Army mission objectives to decommission the SM-1A, terminate the SM-1A decommissioning permit, and release the underlying property for unrestricted use. So as part of the draft EA, we looked at 2 primary alternatives. So we have our proposed action alternative. That's the alternative that would implement the proposed action and meets both the purpose and need that we just previously discussed. Following completion of the proposed action, there'd be no remnants of the SM-1A remaining at the site. We also looked at a no action alternative. Under the no action alternative, USACE would continue to maintain the SM-1A in safe store condition. This alternative would not meet the purpose and need. However, it is included to provide a comparative baseline in accordance with 40 CFR regulations. We also looked at other alternatives as part of the EA process that they did not meet the proposed action's purpose and need, and so they were dismissed. However, they are detailed in the draft environmental assessment as part of the review process. So as part of the draft environmental assessment, we looked at several key resources and analyzed them from an environmental perspective. Those key resources included cultural resources, water resources, socioeconomic and environmental justice, biological resources, air quality, transportation and traffic, utilities, soils, waste, safety and health, and the cumulative effects of all the resources. In addition, we did look at other resources and determined that they weren't going to be impacted, and so they were dismissed from detailed analysis, and those resources include airspace, land use, noise, recreation, seismology, geology and topography, wetlands and floodplains, rare, threatened and endangered species, and visual resources. So that is the end of topic number 3. Still no questions? Okay. So we're going to move into topic number 4 in detail, the overall draft EA findings. So the draft EA findings, the proposed action would have no significant adverse impact on the environment. Under the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106, the proposed action would have an adverse effect on the SM-1A historical property, which is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So we do plan to execute a memorandum of agreement between USACE and the Alaska State Historic Preservation Office, as well as participating consulting parties, to ensure that the adverse effects remain less than significant from this project. So in order to minimize the adverse effects, USACE will be complying with all federal, state, and local regulations, including permitting requirements. We will adhere to best management practices and other applicable measures identified in the draft EA. So from a cultural resources perspective, we do anticipate that there will be a long-term, however less than significant adverse effect on the historic properties from the removal of SM-1A, which, as I indicated, is eligible for listing in the National Register for Historic Places. We don't anticipate any effects on the archaeological resources at the site. And with respect to Section 106 determination, we have an adverse effect on the eligible listed property. So from a best management perspective, as I discussed previously, we will be entering into a memorandum of agreement with the Alaska State Historic Preservation Office, as well as other consulting parties. And we will be following Fort Greely's plan for any unanticipated discoveries throughout the process. So from a water resources perspective, we do anticipate some short-term, but again, less than significant impacts with respect to sedimentation and the potential for accidental spills. We don't anticipate any long-term impacts on the surface water bodies or water quality on the installation or the surrounding community. And we do anticipate some beneficial long-term effects on stormwater management from the restoration of the site and from removal of the wells associated with the original operation of the facility. So from a best management perspective, we will be obtaining a construction general permit for any stormwater discharges from the site. We will develop a site-specific stormwater pollution prevention plan. We will have a site-specific effluent monitoring plan, and we will have spill containment and cleanup kits available at the site. So moving on to socioeconomic and environmental justice impacts. We do anticipate some short-term but beneficial impacts on the local economy from temporary decommissioning-related jobs. We do anticipate increased spending due to the crew that will be living in Delta Junction throughout the process and purchasing of local goods and staying in local lodging. We don't anticipate any short-term or long-term adverse effects on environmental justice communities or children living in the surrounding community or on base, and there are no long-term impacts from this resource. So with respect to best management practices, we will continue our public engagement with the local communities. We'll continue to maintain and update information on the USACE project website, and we will adhere to best management practices for the other resources in order to minimize potential impacts on the nearby communities. From a biological resources impact, again, we do anticipate some short-term but less than significant adverse impacts on vegetation from the temporary disturbances at the site, and potentially on wildlife from those temporary disturbances, displacement, or annoyances during the decommissioning activities, and from the elevated risk of collisions with decommissioning-related traffic. We don't anticipate any long-term impacts from a biological resources perspective. The best management plans include prevention or minimization of introduction or spread of invasive plants. We will use wildlife spotters or escort vehicles during on-post transportation activities as necessary. We plan to coordinate with Fort Greely to address any active migratory bird treaty issues if protected bird nests are observed on the SM-1A site. From an air quality perspective, we do anticipate, again, some short-term but less than significant adverse effects from potential emissions of the fugitive dust and criteria pollutants from the decommissioning-related vehicles and equipment. Again, no long-term impacts were developed as part of the analysis. Some of our best management plans include directly loading the waste for transport. We don't plan to stockpile any of the waste materials on site. We'll transport waste in closed containers as applicable. We will cover all of the payloads and trucks leaving the site. We do plan, as allowed, to spray water on paved and unpaved roads to control any dust generation. And we will cover and spray water on soil stockpiled in anticipation of our backfilling activities at the site. From a utilities impact perspective, there may be some short-term but less than significant adverse impacts from pre-planned temporary utility outages or disruptions during the relocation of the utility systems. We will be working closely with Doyen to move their operational facilities to the south end of the building prior to the start of our decommissioning activities, and we will work closely to ensure there are no impacts to the utilities on base. Again, we don't anticipate any long-term impacts from a utility perspective. From a best management perspective, we plan to coordinate with potentially affected parties in advance and sequence or stagger any temporary utility interruptions or shutoffs. From a soil resources impacts, again, short-term but less than significant adverse impacts from the disturbance and excavation during the decommissioning and dismantlement activities. And here we do anticipate long-term beneficial effects from a soils perspective through the removal of the contaminated soils at the site. From a best management perspective, again, some similar best management practices. So we will have a site-specific stormwater pollution prevention plan to minimize soil migration and sedimentation. We will replace all the excavated soils with clean fill, meeting the applicable Fort Greely requirements. We will have a robust environmental monitoring plan during the entire duration of the project. The team will develop and implement a final status survey process to verify unrestricted release criteria have been obtained. And we will seed the site with native grasses following backfilling and grading of the site. For waste resources, we do have, again, short-term but less than significant adverse impacts due to the generation and management of radioactive and non-radioactive waste. There are no long-term impacts from a waste resources perspective. And again, we do anticipate long-term beneficial effects due to the removal and disposal of all the radioactive and non-radioactive waste at the site. Some best management practices that will be put into place: we will have a hazardous material abatement plan, waste management and disposal plan. We will manage and dispose of waste in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. We'll have a spill control and countermeasures plan, and we will have spill containment and cleanup kits available at the site throughout the duration of the project. From a safety and health perspective, we do anticipate, again, some short-term, less than significant adverse impacts associated with the increased risk of worker exposure or injury during the decommissioning and dismantlement activities. From a long-term effect, we anticipate beneficial impacts on both the safety and health from the removal of the radioactive and non-radioactive waste at the site. So several best management practices will be put into place from a health and safety perspective to include an industrial safety program, an accident prevention plan in accordance with the M385-1-1, which is the Corps of Engineers Safety Manual. Again, a waste management and disposal plan. We will be coordinating with fire and emergency services and other relevant organizations prior to any tasks involving hazardous activities. We will minimize radiological exposures in accordance with Engineer Manual 385-1-80, which refers to radiation protection. We will have a radiation safety program and a radiation protection plan. We will conduct environmental monitoring throughout the duration of the project, and we will establish memorandum of agreements with both fire and emergency response services as well as emergency healthcare providers, both on base and off base. From a transportation and traffic perspective, we do again anticipate some short-term but less than significant adverse impacts from the increased traffic associated with the decommissioning project. The short-term less than adverse impacts from the transportation of the waste. All waste will be packaged and transported in accordance with NRC, USDOT, including International Maritime Dangerous Goods, and US EPA and State of Alaska requirements. So those will all be packaged prior to transport both on base as well as any transport off base. We do anticipate some short-term, again, less than significant adverse impacts on marine ports and shipping. We don't anticipate any short-term impacts on the freight rail transport network. And overall, there are no long-term impacts from this project with respect to traffic and transportation. Some best management practices. We do plan to use trained and qualified contractors to transport our waste. We will have a transportation management plan on post as well as a transportation management plan off post. We will be scheduling all of the decommissioning related traffic for off-peak hours. And we will package and ship all waste in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. So we do want to highlight a few key topics for you with respect to waste transportation and radiation safety. So with respect to waste transportation, non-hazardous solid waste will be loaded directly into containers or trucks and will be transported to in-state disposal facilities. Waste that cannot be disposed of in the state of Alaska will be shipped to the lower 48 states for disposal via a combination of truck transport, train transport, and vessels. Waste will be transported by licensed and qualified contractors in accordance with applicable NRC, USDOT, US EPA, and State of Alaska regulatory requirements and permitting requirements. From a waste transportation perspective, radioactive waste and non-radioactive regulated waste that cannot be disposed of in the state of Alaska will be transported to the lower 48 for final disposal. Our current plan is that we will truck the waste off of Fort Greely to Fairbanks, where it will be transferred to rail cars. It will be transported by train to either the Port of Whittier or the Port of Alaska, where it will be loaded onto vessels. From there, it will be shipped to the Port of Seattle or West Coast ports via established navigation routes. And then once it arrives in a port on the West Coast, it will go by rail or truck to the disposal facilities in the lower 48. So based on our anticipated transportation routes, the truck shipments from Fort Greely to Alaska will likely run twice a week, and it's a 6-hour round trip drive. Rail shipments from Fairbanks to the Port of Whittier or the Port of Alaska, there's 2 weekly shipments available, and it's a 1-day duration to get to either port. and then the vessel to Port of Seattle, Washington, or another selected West Coast port. There's twice weekly service available. They depart on Wednesdays or Fridays, and it's a 13-day transit one way to the Port of Seattle. So moving into some radiation safety issues, one of the primary reasons that the facility is in safe store at this time is to allow for the radioactive decay of the two primary isotopes at the facility. So we do have two primary concerns. One is cobalt-60. It's a gamma-emitting isotope that has a half-life of 5.27 years. And so it's indicated by the red line. And so as you can see, all of the cobalt-60 is decayed away at this point, which makes it safer from an occupational health perspective for our workers to go in and complete the decommissioning at this time. The nickel-63 is a low-energy emitting beta, and so it has a half-life of over 100 years. And so as you can see, it is still prevalent, even though we've been in shutdown for over 40 years. And that's a concern for the disposal facilities. So that will be handled by the long-term disposal facility that we select for all the waste. Some additional radiation safety topics and a key topic from an overall project perspective. Safety is the #1 priority for the Corps of Engineers, to include the safety of our workers, the surrounding tenants on base, and the community. There will be minimal risk to the public throughout the duration of the SM-1 project. The SM-1A reactor pressure vessel contains no nuclear fuel, and the control rods were all removed as part of the initial deactivation during the 73 and 74 timeframe. All of those wastes were shipped off-site, returned to the Department of Energy. The safe store period has restricted access to the radioactive materials and has allowed the residual radioactivity to decay, which will allow for minimal worker exposure to radiation during the decommissioning process. And we will be using a highly skilled team of engineers, radiological health physicists, scientists, and contractors with proven techniques adhering to our safety regulations. So this small chart here, we want to point out two key items to you. The average annual radiation dose to the public on average is 620 millirem per year. And so at the SM-1A, our release criteria is 25 millirem per year. So you can see that you're being exposed on a daily basis to much more radiation than we will be leaving at the site. So any questions on the draft EA findings? What? So we will be moving to topic number 5 on the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106. The Section 106 process for the proposed action is being conducted in parallel with the NEPA process. USACE is the lead federal agency for the Section 106 consultation regarding the proposed action. The Army has determined that the SM-1A is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. SM-1A is a contributing resource in the National Register for Historic Places and is in the eligible Fort Greely Historic District. So 2 photos here to illustrate the areas of potential effect and the historic district on Fort Greely. So the first photo illustrates the SM-1A site, and the blue boundary there, as well as the 3 wells, indicate the area of effect for the SM-1A project. And then you can see in reference to the SM-1A project, the entire historic district on the Fort Greely installation is indicated in the yellow boundary on the other photo. Under Section 106, the proposed action will have an adverse effect on the SM-1A historic property and the Fort Greely Historic District. USACE will resolve this adverse effect by executing a memorandum of agreement with the participating consulting parties, and we will adhere to the stipulations provided within that memorandum of agreement. Execution of the memorandum of agreement will ensure that adverse effects on the historic properties remain less than significant. Under Section 106, we don't anticipate impacts on archaeological resources due to the previous ground disturbance at the site during the construction of the installation and facility. However, USACE will adhere to the U.S. Army Garrison Alaska procedures in the event that a previously unidentified archaeological resource is identified or discovered. Any questions on Section 106? Okay. So we're going to move on to the last and final topic for the evening, topic number 6, public involvement. So we're working very closely with our project stakeholders, and we're committed to transparently sharing accurate and timely information throughout the project with all of our relevant stakeholders to ensure that information is coordinated and any stakeholder concerns are fully addressed. And so some of our key stakeholders include regulators, the property owner and tenants on Fort Greely, federal and state officials, public interest groups, local and tribal officials, and other government agencies. So stakeholder engagement. USACE is consulting with multiple regulatory agencies regarding the proposed action, including but not limited to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Region 10, the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Alaska Office of History and Archaeology, which is the State Historic Preservation Office. USACE is also consulting with federally recognized Alaskan Native tribes in accordance with DoD Instruction 4710.02, interactions with federally recognized tribes. So we are in the middle of the public comment period. So the draft environmental assessment and the draft finding of significant impact, the FONSI, are available for the 30-day public review. And the comment period officially started on February 26th and will run through March 28th. If an extension is needed by the public, there is a process to request that extension, and USACE will take that under advisement and extend the public comment period if needed. The review period is also an opportunity for the public to comment on the Section 106 process, which is being conducted in parallel with the NEPA process. So there are several ways for the public to provide comments and input on the process. Comments can be submitted during the review period at the in-person meeting here tonight or at the meeting in Delta Junction on Thursday. You can submit your comments by email, or you can submit your comments by U.S. Postal Mail. All comments must be postmarked and or received by March 28th. As I said earlier, any public comment and agency comments received on the draft EA will be addressed in the final EA, which we anticipate releasing in the summer of this year. We will be providing the email and postal addresses on the next slide. And again, we are strongly encouraging your participation in the NEPA process. So any questions on public involvement? So we're going to finish up with some just questions and discussion type issues. So first and foremost, how to engage and learn more about the project. We do have a project website. So the SM-1A project website can be found on the Baltimore District homepage, the link that you see here. You can also sign up to be a part of our stakeholder email group on the same project website, and there's a form and information on our project website how to do that. We also have social media, both Facebook, Twitter, and our Baltimore District homepage, where we will be publishing and posting information. Copies of the draft EA are available from USACE upon request, so there are some hard copies here in the room this evening. Electronic copies are also available for download on the project website. Again, indicated here. They're also available for download in the virtual public meeting room. So if you go to the project website, there will be a link to our virtual public meeting room, which will include all the posters that were here at the public meetings in person, as well as electronic copies of the EA and the FONSI, and a tab where you can provide your comments through the virtual public meeting room. Print copies of the draft DA and the draft FONSI are also available at public libraries throughout Alaska, to include the Delta Community Library, the Knoll Wine Public Library in Fairbanks, the library in Anchorage, I'm going to try, and the Fort Wainwright Library. Due to COVID, a lot of these libraries are only allowing you to check out the hard copies. So again, if you'd like a hard copy, we encourage you to request one through us and or utilize the electronic downloads. Finally, ways to comment. Again, you can send your email comments directly to the SM-1A email address you see here. You can fill out a comment form tonight at the in-person meeting or Thursday in Delta Junction. You can send written comments by U.S. Postal Mail to the SM-1A project. Attention Brenda Barber, USACE Project Manager, care of AECOM at their Anchorage office, and they will be receiving all the comments on our behalf there. Again, strongly encouraging your participation in the process, and written comments must all be postmarked and or email comments must be received no later than March 28th. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. We encourage you to remain active in the process with us. I do want to let you know that if you don't have a chance to visit the virtual public meeting room, we will be posting this presentation on all of the public poster boards to our project website on the 12th of March when the team returns home from Alaska. So with that, I will open it up for any final questions or comments. No comments? Okay. So we just want to thank everyone for coming, and all of you who attended virtually. We appreciate you attending virtually, and we look forward to getting your feedback and comments on the process. Thank you.